God, we're here today because of you. We want to thank you just for a really nice place to meet and the freedom to do so in a country that allows us this privilege. I just want to pray for the body around the world that doesn't have this. Those people who are meeting this morning in fear for their life, but they're willing to because of your greatness and your goodness, and they're willing to risk everything. And remind us of that when we act like spoiled children with our rights and our luxuries and all the things that, again, we just so easily take for granted. I want to pray for our Jam kiddos and just the experience that they have up at camp, and just pray that your Spirit would just fill that place and protect them, encourage them, plant seeds that will produce a lifetime of harvest. And thank you for the workers who went and participated in that to make it a great event. Please watch over them as they come back and keep them safe as well. We love you, God, and lift you up in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, so we've been in this spiritual discipline series for several weeks now. And it's been what I think has just been a great series. Just the topics, the things that the people who have shared, have brought to the body. And, you look all the way back at the intro and James talking right off the bat about intimacy with God. Then we talked about self-control. Remember, these are all things that we're identifying as spiritual disciplines. Steon, will you turn me down just a little bit? I feel a little loud. So we talked about self-control, and then Melissa that next week talked about submission and just submitting our lives to Christ. Mark brought a topic of corporate guidance and just the idea of a body, the responsibilities that we have and the discipline needed within that. Garrett talked about prayer. We went on to service the next week and friendship, and then Brianna did a talk last week just about simplicity and just the spiritual discipline that's required for each of those. And I was just thinking, if we practiced a tenth of what we've heard over the course of this series, we would be like the best people on earth. We would win all the awards. And that's what we're going for, right? No, but I was just thinking, like, I was reviewing Brianna's list, kind of her takeaways and challenges from last week. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, I wonder how many people in here that heard that talk did one of the things that she challenged us to do. And yeah, I'm not going to call anybody out or ask anybody to share, but there, yeah, you're welcome, Joy. Yeah, you were the person I was thinking about when I brought this up. But I heard it. I'll keep an eye on you. But no, like, think about that. Think about the hundreds of sermons that you've heard in your life, and the truths that you've processed over time. Understanding and knowing the character of God, what it means to be a follower of Christ, and just the challenges that are inherent in that, just the challenges that are inherent in just being human, just getting up every day, putting one foot in front of the other and trying to figure out. And so one of the things I really appreciated about the way our speakers each presented their information, and this was important to us early on in talking about this series, is that we made sure to communicate it's not about rules. It's not about rules. It's about relationship. It's about relationship. And so if we're correct in our understanding of the Scripture, then Jehovah God, creator of the heavens and earth, wants a relationship with us. So you think on a macro level here, what we're talking about. God of the universe, stepping into our world and saying, I want a relationship with you. And so He made us. This is our Creator who made us and understands our flaws and imperfections. So is He surprised at our disobedience? Is he surprised by our laziness? Is he taken off guard by our sin? Unfortunately, the church, the big C, capital church as a whole, has painted this picture of God who I feel like can be pretty inaccurate at times. You kind of imagine this God who's sitting, waiting, watching you in your humanness, and he's sitting there, he's crouching, he's waiting to pounce on you, to destroy you when you sin. Right? And it may be my fault, but a lot of what I learned growing up left me with that kind of figure of God. Now, there's an important thing to consider in all of that, is that our God is a God, who requires us to act a certain way. There are things that we're told, like, hey, you should live this way. But I think you have to understand and look at him too as a father, a loving father. Garrett said the loving father in his sermon, talked about that. And there's this misnomer in the church, again, the larger church as a whole, that we can't mess up. And we see that even more so in our world today with what we see going on in cancel culture. And there's this general misunderstanding, I think, of what it even means to be a Christ follower. I remember one time after I had given my life to God and had started, I think, just working in youth ministry. And so my family understood and knew that I was working in ministry. And I got into an argument with my sister, and it wasn't anything like, crazy, or we weren't screaming and yelling at each other, but I just flat out didn't agree with her about whatever it was we were talking about, which, shocker, we had plenty of those those times growing up. Never handled them very well growing up. But in this conversation, I remember one of the jabs that she took at me to try and really just try and hurt me was, she said, well, that's just not very Christian-like. And that was one of the things that she came at me with. And assuming I was completely wrong in the course of that conversation, and the way I acted was, different from what God had expected of me, is that still the response that we give people? Or are we looking at our mistakes as learning opportunities that bring us closer to God? Because God doesn't participate in cancel culture. I was looking for what's the opposite of cancel? Because I feel like that's what God is. God is the God of renewal and regeneration. And each mistake that we make, if handled correctly, only serves to draw us closer to who He expects us to be. I think this is one of the reasons He positions Himself in our lives as a Father. I got to think a lot about this myself as I tried to figure out from a pretty early age, my early 20s, what kind of dad I wanted to be. I wanted to make sure and communicate value to my kids. And so I would say things to them like, do you think my love for you is more like, this pebble that I have in my hand here, or like all the sand that you see out on the beach? All the sand you see out on the beach, And Jaron one time was getting ready to leave for school or something. And I said, hey, Jaron, guess what? He's like, I know you love me, and he's walk out. But that was intentional on my part. I wanted to communicate value and love. I wanted to be present and fun. And so Cole and I had many wrestling session where I ended up with a giant wedgie. Because of how we were wrestling, he'd reach around and pull my underwear all the way up, And it would have been easy for me to roll over and crush him, and I did several times just to make sure he knew, that I was the alpha. But we actually still do that. But I wanted to be present and fun. I wanted to be a disciplinarian, but also full of grace. One time, I really don't wake up a whole lot at night, but sometimes I get up and kind of walk around the house and just check things out. And so I'm walking by the stairs and I look up and see Jordy's lights on. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what is this girl doing? So I walked up the stairs and, did the quick knock and enter. And she was like this on her phone or iPod, I guess, and dropped it real quick. And I said, what were you doing? She said, oh, I was just talking to somebody. I was like, oh, who are you talking to? Oh, no one. Well, right then the iPod rang. So I picked it up and slid it across, and there was a guy like kind of like this. Tony, did you know about this? Oh, you did? Okay. And you still, okay, because, some might say she cheated on you, all the way back then. I wanted to teach lessons that prepare my kids for life. When Kylie turned 16, I have a deal worked out with my kids where we'll provide the vehicle, and then they have to pay for their gas and insurance. And so after the first month, Kylie's insurance was due, and it got to be like the 5th or 6th, and she hadn't paid her insurance yet. And so I called her and I said, "Hey, your insurance payment's late. I'm going to waive the late fee this time, but then next time you're going to have to pay that." And she's like, "Oh, I just thought you were going to take it out of my account." I said, "No, that's what you have to do. That's what the world is really like." Teaching those lessons to prepare our kids for life. And I wanted to be really accepting. And our adopted son, Zachary, got to see this when we brought him into our home. I'm not trying to say I did everything right. I have shared with you stories of a lot of my mistakes, and I know that I felt short of being the best dad around. But I wanted a relationship with my kids that helped them to know God and love people. And I'm glad to see that continuing to grow in them today. And again, just kind of circling back, I feel like our speakers have done a really good job helping us understand these spiritual disciplines and ultimately what the goal is: to love God more and to serve Him better through a loving and intimate relationship. That's what we're looking for in all this. So we live in this time of abundant self-expression, right? We see people expressing themselves on all kinds of platforms: blogs, forums, message boards, social media platforms. Perhaps like no other time in history are humans able to express themselves and what they believe, how they feel, all of that. But as I was looking at this talk and trying to figure out, what's a discipline that I feel like the church needs to grow in? And I just kind of wonder how many of us take the time to look inwardly and really pursue self-examination. So we're oftentimes really good at the self-expression piece of it. But I feel like the discipline comes in more on the self-examination part. And this is difficult. It just doesn't come naturally for us. And like many of these spiritual disciplines that we talked about, it's something that takes a lot of work and evolves over time. It's just ultimately a lot easier to point out other people's problems. And that's what we tend to do. We have this issue with ourselves, but it's easier to point outwards and draw the attention away from us onto the people around us. Jesus spoke to this in Matthew 7. He said, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." And there's this problem that goes along with that of being focused first on other people's problems instead of first looking at ourselves. For one, we never know all the facts or about the whole person, but we can know the facts and know who we are and the things that we struggle with. Another problem, I think, with focusing on other people first is that we're not qualified to judge anyone else. Only God is qualified in that role. But we are qualified to judge ourselves against the example of Christ. And that's what all this is about ultimately when we're talking about self-reflection, is about looking at who we are, where we are, the things that we're thinking and doing, and comparing that to what we know about Jesus. And what does that look like? There's going to be a gap there. We know that. And thank God that's where grace comes in. At the best of our best, there's still a shortfall between that and what God's expectation is. But that's where grace comes in and steps in and saves us. You just think about every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in the fall, football stadiums are full of critics. And these are critics who, if they themselves were out there on the field, it'd be an absolute laughing stock. You know, you see this all the time. You hear people talk about, well, old Dak, he should have done this. It's like, you go try and do that with those guys chasing you around the field, trying to rip your head off. See how you do. It would be a lot worse. And the church should be a safe haven from this kind of contempt, yet we often look the exact same. We just mirror the world that we're living in. What are we doing? Who are we modeling when we come into the assembly and nothing is ever good enough? One of my favorites, in quotes, aka most vomit-inducing, is when people leave the church and they're mad because no one noticed they left. And my initial question is always, how many people did you invest in? How many people did you call when they didn't show up to church? When did the church become all about you? What does the church owe you? Is who we are and what we have, will that ever be good enough? But see, that requires a person to look inwardly, to consider themselves. Maybe there was something wrong there. Maybe the church didn't do something right. But just as you were forgiven, should the church not be forgiven? Just as you fall short of God's goodness and glory, should the church not be allowed that same luxury? But we hold the church sometimes to this standard and point the finger instead of just looking inwardly at ourselves and saying, what have I done? How can I fix this? How can I step in and make this better? And Jesus really presses on this for us by using this illustration, this plank versus speck. It was literally laughable. I mean, it would be like, me grabbing this and going, hey, Eddie, so you got this little kind of piece of dust in your eye. You need to work on getting that out. And here I'm sitting with this like giant iPad sticking out of my head. No, that's the response that Jesus was looking for. Thank you. Thank you for illustrating that for me. He's taking it to an extreme there. But no, that's ultimately the response. It's laughable to think about that, yet that's what we do. That's what we do. Christy and I were looking for a show to watch the other night, and we started and stopped several shows. We're on Amazon Prime. We jumped over to Netflix. We were trying to find a show to watch, and one of these shows in the first season, the first episode, there was this dinner party, and these two women were talking at this dinner party, and one of them was speaking to her friend and was really upset that her friend so-and-so wasn't at the party. And the other friend looked at her and go, oh, she doesn't like you. And, just like straight up like that. And the woman was like, what? She doesn't like me? She's like, yeah, she doesn't like you. You're always talking about yourself. You're always talking about things you have. You're always talking about everything's perfect. And she doesn't like to be around you. And it was just kind of this shocking thing for this woman to think like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that woman doesn't like me. And we just miss it. We just completely miss that unless we're willing to really look inwardly and position ourselves correctly. So I want to give you just a couple of thoughts about this discipline of self-examination. And the first one is that you have to examine yourself in humility. Romans 12:3, for by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. How often do you do this? As you come across the responsibilities and the joys and conflicts of life, are you examining in each one of those situations your heart and mind and saying, does this line up with the Spirit of Christ? Maybe you are. When you find yourself offended, do you first examine yourself and think about why you're offended? Why does that upset me? And should it upset me? Again, in light of Christ and understanding who He is and what He wants for us. When you desire change in others, do you first think of your own faults and the things that you need to work on? We talk about this a lot in marriage counseling, just this idea of spouses living together, and we use kind of this saying, no one wants to be married to their biggest critic. And that's a real difficult thing, especially when you're living with somebody and that's years after years, and you know the best about them and the worst about them, and they the same about you. It's easy to start pointing out those things over and over. But covenant marriage is about being in relationship that is about drawing the other person closer in their relationship with God. So you literally have to take yourself out of it and think through this very different lens. And it's again, it doesn't come naturally. It's something we have to work at. Do you think first of your own faults? When you react with anger or sorrow or whatever emotion, do you really struggle to understand the reasons behind your reactions? So studies are showing that the church membership is on decline, just in general. Fewer than half of U.S. adults belong to a religious congregation now. This came out in a study a couple of years ago. And they kind of lump in all religions together, but there's something telling within that. And so Gallup, who did this poll, began asking this question like 80 years ago, when over 73% of people said they were a part of a religious organization. And so as of 1999, that number had fallen from 73 to 70. So just a little over 20 years ago, over 70% of people said that they were a part of a religious organization. And now, in just the span of 20 years, we've dropped to 47%. And I see this. You guys probably see this. I mean, I think of church 20 years ago and the number of visitors and people coming and all that stuff. It's different. It's just straight up different. And I just wonder if what the church has modeled all these years is really starting to catch up with it. Surely one of the reasons is because people are tired of seeing people set themselves up as being this perfect churchgoer, only to find out that, they're really just a sorry, struggling sinner just like everyone else. And so we elevate, and then when that person falls off into reality, into humanity, we're all just shocked. We just can't believe that so-and-so did this or Pastor so-and-so did that. And we cast them out and cancel them in those moments. Countless spiritual supergiants have fallen over the past 30 years. But maybe we shouldn't have put them there ever to begin with. Maybe that's the reality. What if instead of trying to pretend like we're all perfect, the church would adhere to scriptures like Romans 12? Would the church be growing today? Would the church be flourishing if we stopped this fake facade and asked the really tough questions and looked inwardly and said, what do I need to do to just be more like Jesus? And we just ask that question. You know, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, philosophers and people who think through a lot of these kind of things have challenged humanity with just the thought, know yourself. Just know yourself. Do you know yourself? Do you communicate what you know about yourself to the people around you, or do you pretend to be something you're not? What an opportunity we have in our weakness to show off how great God is. See, we're so busy trying to build ourselves up and make ourselves look good and act like we got everything down, that we almost paint this picture like we don't need God. And in that self-reflection, instead, we're saying, no, I'm a sinner saved by grace. I have these struggles that I can't get to go away. Paul says this in Romans. It's like the things I want to do, I don't do those things. The things I don't want to do, that's what I end up doing. Will I ever be free from this body of sin? And so what does it say to a world when all we try and do is look perfect? It tells the world we don't need God. We don't need what He has to offer. Right? It's a simple thought. But why do we continue to pursue that? What an opportunity we have in our weakness to show out how great God is. I've seen this in my friend Scott Dugan. Y'all, this man is on fire. After going through one of the worst possible things imaginable, he's humbly evaluated who he is and how great his God is. And he's turning the world around him upside down. And I love last week when I was talking to him about this, just kind of asking about these different things that he's doing. I mean, every time his response is, it ain't me, it's God. It's just God. It's just God. And we point people back to the correct source. There's a danger here that we have to be careful of. We can go too far and it becomes a show the other direction. So there's some place that you find where you understand and admit your weakness and you draw people to God through that. So examine yourself in humility. And then the second thing I want to talk to you guys about is just examine yourself through faith in the light of Christ. So it's difficult for us to be honest about our own character and motivations if we don't examine ourselves by faith. I've mentioned this a few times already, this idea of using Jesus as the benchmark. So God alone truly knows us. He knows our darkest thoughts and our highest hopes. And in this act of self-examination, we appeal to His knowledge of us while depending on the grace provided by Jesus. So our Creator knows us thoroughly. He understands who we are. He gifted us from the very start. And I can only imagine when we start stepping out of that gifting, His thought process, wondering why. Why is not what I gave you enough? Why do you have to try and take that or be somebody else that you're not? Why can't you just be comfortable with who I made you, how I made your body, how I made your spirit, how I made your mind? Because we're all different. And that's something to celebrate. It's not something, to be frustrated by. But here's what happens in our flesh. We look at so-and-so and we think, I wish I could have that. In my own personal self-reflection, I feel like one of the things that God's really working on me with is just, being content. Just being content. God has been ridiculously good to me. If He gave me nothing else from this point forward, I have lifetimes of blessings that generations and generations of people would love to have. Yet it's never enough. I find this in my mind. I'm like, it's never enough. I want more. I want better. I want nicer. I want more expensive. I want whatever. Fill in the blank. I'm just confessing. But when is that enough? And in that act of self-examination, we have to look at who God made us and probably take a step back and say, you know what? What God did is good enough. What God made is good enough. And so we learn to see ourselves through the lens of Christ. And this is the entirety of the Gospels that reveals the character of Christ to us. It's by faith, and with this example, we have to think of ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, do our concerns reflect the concerns of Christ, as His concerns reflected the concerns of the Father, right? So anyone who knows me knows the Father. So now we can understand God and know God by looking at Christ and just ask that question, do our concerns reflect the concerns of Christ? It doesn't matter your age. If Jesus is Lord of your life, if you've made that proclamation, are you lining up with the thoughts and the attitude and the mind of Christ? Does what brought Him joy and what brought Him sorrow bring us the same thing? Do we hold in high esteem those things that He held in high esteem? And do we hold in low esteem those things that He held in low esteem? And God, I just think about myself. I'm like, I'm completely unworthy to be up here saying these words to you because I do not line up a lot of times, probably a vast majority of the time. And so again, in my flesh, I'm confessing that to you. Do we react as He did to mistreatment and disrespect and abuse and unrighteousness? And I'm afraid that this is where we can really get off track in this very self-focused culture we live in. So the alternative to living in the mind of Christ is just to live in our flesh. And I just think, what do I want to be known for? This is maybe a little morbid, but sometime recently, just within the past month or so, I was thinking, what do I want my headstone to say when I pass away? And just a simple statement. And what I think what I'd really like is for it to just say, He loved people well. Just something simple like that. And that's what I want to live my life doing. I want to love the people around me well. I want to try and serve them well. But the absence of living in the mind of Christ is living in our flesh. And there's people in our community, in our church community, who are known for different things. I can say Glenn and Stacy Lively, and the word generosity probably will pop into your mind. And that's not something that they promote. It's something that they live, right? And countless people in here have been on the receiving end of their generosity. And so there are names of people in here that I could mention, and different things would be said about what they're known for. You know, that they would be known for, and then just roll through the list of things you see on social media. You can call any of them out. We all have it, we all do it. Whether it's around politics or, self-image, what we have, you can just fill out the list. And people, and then sometimes, just like that lady at that dinner party, we're surprised when it's echoed back to us, this is what you're known for. I don't want to be known for owning a business. I don't want to be known for making websites. I don't want to be known for helping my wife with her cheerleading business. I don't want her to be known for being a cheerleader or a choreographer. I don't want my kids to be known by John and Christy's parents. They have this. I don't want that. I just want people to know he gets up every day, tries really hard to love God and love his people. Amen. And that's it. Anything beyond that just is distorted. So think about where you are right now and what people know you for. And again, they're knowing you for it because you're telling them that. You're messaging that in your social media feeds, in your conversations, in everything. You're saying those things. And it's important here, don't blow this off. Because here's the thing, you have a responsibility as an image bearer to reflect the goodness of God. That's your responsibility. We see this within the first few chapters of the Bible. What does it mean to be human? Well, we can just start and maybe even stop with just that one thought. We're to be image bearers. And so again, connect the dots with me here. What does it say to the people around us when we reflect to them the world? We're bearing the image of the world. We're not reflecting the goodness of God. We're reflecting the world that we live in. And so think about that. And an easy list can be found in the fruit of the Spirit. This is just a real simple list you can kind of bounce your thoughts off of and the things that you do. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. So think through your billboard. You know what I'm talking about here? We all are basically just a walking billboard. People read us, they see us, they know what we're about. And sometimes we have things on there, guys, that are just not like Jesus. They're just not like Jesus. And we have to be careful of that. Because again, what are we messaging? If our main responsibility is to model the goodness of God, what are we messaging? And I think of something Jeff and I were talking about last week, just about how important it is as parents, because our kids are watching. Our kids are listening. And this is a test that sometimes is a real slap in the face when your kids are doing or struggling or saying with something. Where did they get that from? Well, you probably don't have to look very far. And I get that. And I think about some of the messaging of things that, just have a lot of pride kind of wrapped around them. I remember one time I went up into Cole's room and he had, he's terrible, by the way. I'll just tell you guys if y'all didn't know. It's easy to pick on him. There's a long list. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. But I went into his room and he had one of those big come and take it flags up in his room. And I know the story. I understand the history behind that. I get it. But that thought has been transitioned in our culture and our society. And I was just thinking like Jesus would say, come and take it, but in a much different way. come and take it on the flag is I dare you to try and take this thing from me. And Jesus' come and take it was so different. It wasn't about rights. It was the opposite of that. It was about pouring that out to say, come and take it. Come and take this life. And you could go down the list. There's 1,000 things like that. And so my encouragement to you is just to be careful with what you're messaging. Anything where you think you're above or better than somebody else, do you see that in the character of Christ? Everything we see in the kingdom is upside down. It's the opposite of that. The world elevates and lifts up and dares somebody to come and take it. The kingdom flips that upside down and says, these people aren't even important. These people are important. This is important. This thought process. Down here, come and take it. Come and take it. Anything I've got, that's yours. Anything I have, you want it, it's yours. You know, and this beckons back to that sermon that Garrett did several months ago just about turning the other cheek. There's a lot to think about in all that, guys. I'm not saying I've got it all figured out. I'm trying to struggle through it myself every day. But the bottom line is Christ is our filter. And praise team if you guys want to come on up. Christ is our filter. We have to adjust. We have to adjust. We have to look inwardly and say, what are the things that don't line up with Christ, and change those things. And if you feel confident, if Cole's waving the come and take it flag and he feels confident behind that and he wants to stand before God someday and be cast into hell, no, I'm just kidding. No, if he wants to defend that, that's Cole's decision. We each have that decision. We have hills that we can try and die on, right? Is that one you want to? And you just need to go down the list and think through those things in your life. Guys, again, we could take hours to just try and figure that piece of it out. It takes a lot of time. We have to adjust, and that adjustment takes time. It takes years and years. It will take your whole life. It will take your whole life, day by day. 2 Corinthians 4, therefore, we don't lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. This talk here, this interaction that you'll have with people, the message, the words that we sang, all of those things will be just a little part of your renewal today. That God is moving and making you more like His Son. Outwardly we're wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an external glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on not on what is seen. Let me say that again because I messed that statement up. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. How are you doing? How are you doing in this? Really looking inside, really looking at who you are, what you are, how you think. How are you doing lining up? And so I want to give you a few quick practicals because I don't want James to be overly critical of my talk. Just real quick here, just be still. Just be still and be quiet. Just be quiet and ask God. And He'll be faithful. He'll hold up His end of the bargain. He'll send the Spirit to convict your heart, to make you think through and see the places where you're not lined up. Be still, be quiet, ask, listen, and then work on changing. Work on being renewed day by day. Amen? Love you guys. Thank you.